Okay, so we are at the top of Daf Ayin Tedamid Aleph 79a. And of course, we begin with the Mishnah at the very top of the Daf. And so we'll just jump right in with that Mishnah. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. So the Mishnah is going to discuss, continue to discuss the throwing of Gittin and when the woman takes possession to become divorced. So Haisa Omedes al Rosh Hagam. If the woman is standing on top of a roof, and we're going to assume for the moment that it's her roof, Uzrako la, and he throws the get up to her. So then, Kevan Shahigia la Avir Hagag, once it gets into the airspace of the roof, doesn't even have to actually land on the roof, it just has to be in the airspace, Harezo Magoreshes, then she is divorced. Hu milamala vehi milamata, if we reverse the situation and she's down below and he's up above, Uzroka low, la, and again he throws it to her. Once it leaves the airspace of the roof, so now it's not over the roof, but rather over the courtyard. So then, Nimchak or Nisra, even if it were to become erased or burnt, Harezo Magaresha, she's already divorced. Again, the reason is that once the get has entered her airspace, so then she is considered divorced. Now, V'halo Minter. Well, 1 second. We have seen before that we need. And let's do quickly. Tosos here. At the top Tosos on the daf. So Haisish Omedes Berosh Hagag, if she's standing on the top of the roof. So L'Rebbe Oshia the Amar La'el Afilu He B'Tiveria B'Chatzera B'Tzipori. Well, 1 second. Why did we even need to have her standing on the roof? Let her be. According to Rabbi Oshia, she could be in Tiveria, and her courtyard could be in Sipori. And we said as long as it was watched, she would be able to take possession of the get. And so as a result, why do we need her to be actually present there? So Hai Omedes, Hainu Kamisha Omedes, meaning that it doesn't necessarily mean to be taken literally that she has to be present. So this Mishnah does not actually contradict Rabbi Oshia's statement that even that it can work on her possession, her property can work to acquire the get, even if she's not there. That we're talking about where the place is being watched, and so she knows it's protected. And we said that was the same way that we explained when she's standing in her house or in her chatzer. Inami. Alternatively, nakat omedet laoshmeinan to begagdida myri. Or alternatively, the reason that we specifically say that she's standing on the gag is because we're talking about her possession, and so that's why we're saying that she's standing there. She's standing in her rishus. As we'll see in the Gemara in the end will say that we're talking about a situation where the roof belongs to her in the first case, and the courtyard belongs to her. Okay, I don't know how much I lost. I don't know whether anybody can just share whether I know that we got disconnected. So and I know that my internet is unstable. Were people able to hear the discussion of the Mishnah and this Tosos or not?
No, I lost that.
What did you say, Stan?
I lost that.
Okay. So let me just summarize. I apologize for my being in an unstable situation here. So again, the Mishnah has two cases. The first is she's standing on the roof, and the second is she's standing in the courtyard. In each case, as soon as the get gets into her airspace, she becomes divorced. And in the second case, we even said, we added the concept that even if it is gets erased or burnt before it even lands in the courtyard, once it's in her airspace, she's, again, she's divorced. And Tosfos asked the question, I don't understand. According to Rabbi Oshia, who says that you don't even have to be present, why did the Mishnah specifically say that she was present in the courtyard or present on the roof? Let her be in Sipori, let her be across the country. And the answer is that it's lav dafka. It doesn't have to mean that she's actually present. It just means that she's guarded. So now the Gemara begins and says, 1 second, how do we know that this is a guarded situation in the first place? Doesn't the get, in order for her to be able to take possession of it, doesn't it have to be guarded? So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Begag sheyesh lo ma'akaskinan. We're talking about with a roof that has a fence around it, and so that's how it's guarded. So Ula bar Menashia mishmei da'imi Amar hacha b'pachot mishlosha samach legagaskinan. Or alternatively, we can say that that we're talking about a situation where the document was within 3 tfachim of the roof. And so as a result, based on the concept of lavud, where we say that as something that's within 3 tfachim of one another is considered as if there's no space between them. So as a result, to call pachos mishlosha samach legag kigag dami, anything within 3 tfachim is like the roof itself. So that is the second possible answer. Oh, and let me reshare my screen. I realized that. Oh, a second, I got to take it back. Oh, dang. Now, because I was the previous, because I loaded in, it's not letting me share my screen because I'm not the participant, because I'm just a participant. So my apologies for not being able to share my screen at the moment. All right. Okay. So humalamala. So let's say that he's above and she's below. So that's the second situation in the Mishnah. So we're going to ask the same question. But halo minter, again, how could it be a divorce as soon as it gets into the airspace of the courtyard? She's not guarding it. The get itself is not protected, and it's not protected by her. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, kagon shahayu mechitzos hatachtonos otvos al halyonos. Well, we could say that when it comes to the lower courtyard, its walls are even higher than the walls of the roof. So V'chein Amar Rabbi Elazar Amar Rabbi Oshia, and Rabbi Elazar ben the name of Rabbi Oshia says the same thing. Kigon shehaya mechitzos hatachtonos otvos al halyonos. V'chein Amar Ula Amar Rabbi Yochanan kigon shehaya mechitzos hatachtonos otvos al halyonos. Again, 3 different answers, all saying the exact same thing: that the courtyard, the walls of the courtyard, extend up beyond the walls of the roof. And so one can imagine a situation. So Tosfos then asked, I don't understand, if we're talking about where, imagine 2 squares next to each other, one square is the roof and the other square is the courtyard. When the person throws the get over the wall, get into the courtyard, isn't it going to be above that those upper walls? So how could that work? So Tosfos offers 3 different explanations for the situation. One is that instead of 2 equal size squares, imagine one large square and one small square. The large square is the courtyard, the small square is the roof. And so although the small square is again, please let me know if you're not able to hear me. Although the small square is, the first answer of Tosfos, I'm sorry, is the fact that, well, maybe just 3 walls is sufficient. So even though the wall between the 2 squares of equal size is a little bit lower, the wall for the roof, the other 3 walls for the for the square that is the courtyard are higher. And so those three walls effectively protect the get immediately as soon as it goes into the airspace of the courtyard. So that's answer number one. Answer number two is that that the square for the rooftop is actually smaller, and so you can imagine a small square next to a large square. And so in that small square, yes, it has a lower wall around it, and so but we can treat that lower wall as if it's like an opening, a doorway into the courtyard. And so a doorway is not considered something that prevents an object from being watched because of the walls that are around it. And so as a result, that's a second possible answer to how we can have that the walls of the courtyard will immediately provide protection as soon as the get goes over the land of the courtyard. And the third possibility is that we can imagine that there's one square inside of another square. So imagine that the rooftop and the whole building structure is in the middle of the courtyard. And so the walls that are around the courtyard are much higher than the walls that are around the rooftop. And so as soon as the get leaves the rooftop airspace and becomes part of the wall, part of the courtyard airspace, it's considered watched because we know that it's not going to leave that airspace because the walls around the courtyard are even higher than the walls at the rooftop. So those are three explanations of how this could all work from a physical structure, and we would still say that the get is protected. Okay. I'm getting a little feedback from you, Stan. I'm going to put you on mute. If you need to say something, feel free to unmute. I don't have the ability to do that.
All right, thank you.
Okay. All right. So Amrle Rabbi Abba Le'ula. So now the Gemara continues, and it says, so the Gemara is now going to wonder, how our Mishnah corresponds to a debate regarding carrying on Shabbos, because carrying on Shabbos, there's a biblical prohibition, and that prohibition is limited to where one lifts something in a public domain and puts it down in a private domain, or vice versa. You have to lift it in a private domain and put it down in a public domain. So now if somebody throws something from one part of Rishus Harabim to another part of Rishus Harabim, but it goes through and over a Rishus Hayachid, there's a debate. Rebbe says that something in the air is like it's resting on the ground. So the person violated Shabbos biblically by picking up the object in a public domain and effectively putting it down in a private domain, even though it never actually lands in the private domain. While the rabbis disagree, saying airspace is not like land. And so the object was picked up in a public domain, and put down in a public domain. And so that's not a biblical prohibition. So with that background, we can proceed and see that the question that's asked. So, come on, who does our Mishnah follow? The Rebbe. It seems like it follows Rebbe, because he's the one who says that when something is, in the air, it's as if it's viewed as it has come to rest. So Amar Le, so Ula responds, no, it doesn't have to be. You can say that when it comes to a get, our Mishnah can even be because the Rebbe in Shabbos. Maybe Rebbe and the rabbis only argue with respect to Shabbos. Because what's the concept with respect to get? It's not about it landing, it's about it being watched. And so as a result, as soon as it's watched, we'll be able to say, as soon as it's watched, we'll be able to say that it's going to come inter. And here we have that the get is watched as soon as it's in the airspace. So therefore, it may be that the rabbis would even agree to Rebbe that in this case, would treat it either landed already, or more specifically, landing isn't what's important. And so, and indeed, Rabbi Asi said that we're talking about a situation where the lower walls extend above the upper. Amrle Rabbi Zera Rabbi Asi, Kiman, Amr Kaluta, Kadamya, Amrlai, Rabbanan. Ad kan lo pligi Rabbanan alei de Rabbi Elul in Shabbos aval hachab b'shum interreg who hakam inter. So we have the exact same discussion between Rabbi Asi in the name of Rabbanan and Rabbi Zera that again Rabbi Zera thought that maybe we would say that our Mishnah is like Rabbi, but Rabbi Asi responded that no, it could even be like the rabbis. Okay, so now we said in our Mishnah that even if it got erased while it was in the air, it's still going to be a valid get, because before it got erased, it was already in the woman's airspace and it was protected. And so as a result, she's already divorced. So Amar of Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravuha, Lo Shanu Ella Shenimchak, Derech Yerida. That's only true when the get was on its way down. If, and you can imagine, if the get was still, its trajectory was still rising, because of course the person on the rooftop needed to throw the get over the wall of the rooftop, so at least at some point it was rising, so then that would still be considered, that would not be, then she would not be considered divorced. So so my time, why should going up be different? Because Mi'ikara, from that beginning, while it's still rising, Lola Minachkai, it's not actually going down, it's not landing. So the point is that it could be effectively leaving. You can imagine it this way. If in fact the person actually threw it and it was rising, and always effectively over the walls of the and it kept rising until it was even over the walls of the lower courtyard, well, then it never was really being watched by the courtyard, because in fact it got thrown over those walls. So if he accidentally threw it too hard and he threw it beyond the courtyard and beyond the walls of the courtyard, so it never was underneath the walls of the courtyard, well, then it wouldn't be a good get. And so similarly here, if you throw it and it's still going up and that's when it was erased, well, that would be problematic, and it wouldn't be a valid get, because we won't know that in fact it would actually have landed in the courtyard. So what about, and similarly with Nisraf, when we have that a case of it being burned, Amar of Nachman, Amar Rabba Baravua, Lo Shanu Ela Shikadam Get Lidlika. We have to say that the fire that burned it, wherever it was burning, the object burning the get, the fire had to be there second, meaning when the person threw it, the fire wasn't there, because Aval Kadma Delika Get low. But if in fact the get was the fire was there before the get, well, then it's not in fact a valid get, because my timer because why not? Because as soon as the husband threw it, it was on its way to being burnt. It was never on its way to being actually watched. So in both these situations, you need it to be in a dimension that is and in a trajectory that shows that it actually could be viewed as being washed, and it's just something else that came in on some level as a surprise and caused the get to be interrupted, either through erasure or through burning. And if even so, in those cases, we can still say it's a valid get. So Amar Rav Chisda Rishuyas Chalukim Begittin. So now we're going to talk about a key element that has come out of, that we've seen throughout these things. And Rashi explains the Rishuyos Chalukas Legin. It's about midway down in the narrow lines of Rashi. Im hishila habal makom b'chatzero. If the husband, we saw this in connection with the block that was in a courtyard, that if the block was sufficiently large and it landed on the block, and the husband had lent the space to the woman, that it would not be a valid get because the block is a different space. And so im hishila habal makom ro, and again continuing in Rashi, if the husband lent the wife space in his courtyard, the kabbalat gita, to receive her get, lo hishilu gago obeto, well, he lent her space in the courtyard, not on the roof and not in his house. The lo amrinan lo kapid, and we don't say that he is not particular, and therefore it should be a get. To trema komot lo mostly, that he's not giving her more than one location. He's not going to give her two locations. Mishum demaisi Allah rayim mesnisan nakat lo hacha. And we're going to say that this is shown by our Mishnah, and so that is why we're talking about it here. So Amrle Rami Bar Chama Larava Minale Sabaha. How do you, the elder, or how did Rav Chisda, the elder, know this? So Amrle, Rava explains, Masnisinhi, it's our Mishnah. Haisa Omedes Al Rosh Hagag Uzra Kola. If she's standing on top of the roof and he throws it to her, Kevan Shehigia Getla Avir Hagag Harezel Megareshes. So since he threw it up to and it's in the airspace of the roof, she's divorced. So B'mai Askinan, what are we talking about? Now we're gonna, again, this is going to try and prove Rav Chisda's statement, but in the end we will see that it's not a great proof. So Pamayaskin, what are we talking about? If we're talking about where it's her roof and her courtyard, so Lamali Abir Agag, why do I even need to speak about the airspace? Because as soon as it's in the air of the courtyard, she's divorced. So it must be the husband's. But 1 second, mihigila avir hagag my havi. If it's the husband's airspace and the husband's courtyard, who cares about that? So other ela pshita begag day. Well, we must be talking about her rooftop and his courtyard. Well, 1 second, if that's the case, Ema Seifa, what about the end of the mitzvah? Now he's above and she's below. So Kavan Shiyatza Mershus Agag, and the Mishnah continues, once the get leaves the airspace of the roof, so nimchak onisra harezo megareshes, even if it's erased or burnt, she's divorced. Well, 1 second, and if you're telling me that in the first case of our Mishnah, we're talking about it's her roof and his courtyard, amai megareshes, why should she be divorced when it leaves the domain of the airspace of the roof? It's the roof that belongs to her. So you want to tell me that it's his rooftop now and her chutzner? Well, 1 second. The first part of our Mishnah talks about her roof and his courtyard. And now the end of the Mishnah is talking about his roof and her chutzner. So that doesn't make any sense. So elalav. So we must say that both cases are talking about where the husband lent space for the wife to receive the get. And as a result, we can see that a person lends only one space. That's why that if he lent her the roof, then it's only when it's in the roof that she will get divorced. And if he lent her the courtyard, it's only in the courtyard where she will get divorced. And two places don't get lent out. So Amrle, Ramin Bar Chama says back to Rava, Midi area, that's not really a good proof, because Dilma Hagdisa, Hagadisa, maybe the two parts of the Mishnah are each dealing with their only case. Resha Begagdida, Bechatzer Didei, Besefa Begagdide, Bechatzer Dida. Maybe the beginning of our Mishnah is talking about where she owns the roof, and the end of the Mishnah is talking about where she owns the courtyard. And the beginning of the Mishnah is talking about where he owns the courtyard, and the end of the Mishnah is talking about where he owns the roof. And that's totally fine. And just because we change the case doesn't mean that that isn't really a big problem. All right, so that shows that we've got, so we don't actually have a definitive proof. And indeed, that is why when we read the Mishnah, we read the Mishnah as saying that we're talking about her gag in the beginning and her courtyard in the end. All right. now that during this the conversation, we've touched on the fact that there are some differences between Shabbos and Get. And so Amarava, Shlosh Midos Begittin. There are three different areas where you might have wanted to say that the same law should apply to a get as to Shabbos, but we're going to see that they're actually different. So Hada Amarabi Kluta B'misha Huncha, because we saw that Rebbe is the one who says that when you have something that's in the airspace, it's as if it's already it's already resting. Upligi Rabbanan Alei, and the rabbis disagree with him. Hani Milu Inyan Shabbos, and that was a disagreement only with respect to Shabbos. Aval Hacha B'shum Interehu, but here it's not about whether it comes to rest. Shabbos is about picking up and putting down, but Gittin is about being watched. V'haminter, and so as long as it's being watched, even the rabbis would agree that that's considered a transfer. You don't have to actually use the concept that airspace is like it's coming to rest. V'hada amar Rav Chisda, so that's number one. V'hada amar Rav Chisda, no, it's kana rishus hayachid, and so now item number two is that Rav Chisda said that if you take a stick and you put it in a private domain, Uriosho Traskal, and you have a pole all the way up to the top, Vizarak Benachal Gabab, and now it lands on top of the top tray, Afilu Gavoa Mea Amma, even if the pole is 100 Amos high, Chayev, you are you're liable because you have transferred something from one domain to another. Because private domain, extends all the way up to the heavens. So Hanimilu in Shabbos, but the fact that your chayiv only applies on Shabbos. But here, what matters is not about whether or not it actually comes to land. You can imagine that it would land on that plate all the way up there. But even if he made that amazing shot and he threw the get and it landed on the plate that's at the top of a 100-foot pole, that's not watched, that's not guarded. Bahalo minter, it's not being guarded. And so as we turn to Ayin Tedem and Bet, we have we're ready for the third of the differences, because again, in the case of that plate at the top of a 100-foot pole, when it comes to Shabbos, it came to rest, so that's fine. But when it comes to Gittin, it's not being watched, and so as a result, it's not fine. It's not a valid get. And the third situation where we have a difference between Shabbos and Gittin is according to the statement of Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, because he says Lo Yamod Adam Begagzeh v'Yiklo mi Megashavim Megago Shel Chavero. On Shabbos, you can't go up on top of the roof and take rainwater from one rooftop to another rooftop. Shekashem Shediurin Chalukin Milamata, because just as there are separate homes underneath the roof, even if you have almost like a shared roof, it's separate homes. So too the rooftops are separated. And Hanimila Inyan Shabbos, this is with respect to Shabbos, about the Inyan Get. But when it comes to Gittin, what matters is whether or not, if the husband gives this space, gives the rooftop to the wife in order to be divorced, well, if he owns both buildings and he gives her the rooftop of building number one, well, in general, he's not going to be particular about the fact that she might use rooftop number two. And so if he throws the get up to her and it lands on rooftop number two, well, even though it's considered two different domains with respect to Shabbos, when it comes to Gittin, we're going to say that he's not particular. V'kuli high low kapti inchi. When it comes to two adjoining roofs, the divorce will be valid even if the get landed on the other rooftop and not the rooftop that he was intending to give it to her. So, all right. So now we've gone through the three different aspects, And now we're going to have, again, some more rules with respect to airspace. So, Amar Abaye, Shtei Chatzeros Zolif Nimazu, if you have two courtyards, one within another, and so Panimis Shalab Chitzona Shalab, and you have the inner one is owned by her, and the outer one is owned by him. So again, we got two squares, one inside the other. And let's say that the outer walls, the walls that surround the larger square, are higher than the ones that surround the lower square. Uzrakolo, and now he throws the get to her. So he throws the get naturally over the lower inner walls. But when he throws the get does not go above the walls of the outer space. Mechitzos hachitzona. So kevan sheigila aver mechitzos hachitzona, as long as his throwing stays below, or at least it reaches the point that it is below the walls of the outer yard, harezo magareshes. As soon as it goes over the inner yard, it's going to be divorced. So even though in general you need the get to be within and below the level of the walls that of the domain where the woman is standing in order for the divorce to take effect, because until it goes to that level, it's not being considered watched. In this case, because the outer courtyard has higher walls and it also protects the inner courtyard, so we're going to say as long as the get is below the outer walls, that's also going to work in order to affect a divorce. And my timer, why is that the case? After all, it's not below the walls of the inner courtyard. Penimis guva b'mechitzos hachitzona kamash mintera, because the walls of the inner courtyard itself is also guarded by the outer courtyard walls, and so as a result, that those outer courtyard walls can serve as creating protective airspace that allows her to take ownership of the get, even though it is above the level of the inner courtyard's walls. Okay, Masha Ein Kain Bekupos. However, this same concept won't actually work when it comes to two boxes. Shtei kupos zo b'tok zo. If you have two boxes as opposed to courtyards, so the boxes are obviously movable objects. So pnimis shalav v'chitzona shalo, and the inner one belongs to her, and the outer one belongs to him. Uzrokala, and he throws it from into the inner box. Even if it gets inside the airspace of that box, she is not divorced. My taima to halonach, because it has to actually land. There's a difference between airspace of real property and airspace of movable property like a box. Airspace of movable property does not provide the protection that airspace of real property provides, and is not considered sufficient watching until it actually lands in the box. Well, 1 second. Why? What about when it does land? This is another case of a utensil that belongs to the buyer in the property of the seller, and we've said all along that that's a case of debate, and so as a result, shouldn't that not work? So hakabamayaskinan, the kupa she'en la shulayim. So we're talking about where the husband's outer box doesn't have a bottom. So the inner box is not in fact resting on something that belongs to the husband, but rather it's resting on space that we're going to say belongs to her. And so as a result, that's when we can say the inner box can be viewed as being sufficient when it lands on the inner box, and that way she will be divorced. Okay, so now that brings us to the next Mishnah, and the next Mishnah discusses the concept of get yashan, an old get. We've seen this a little bit before, but this is the Mishnah that is the main source. Shamai Omrim Poter Adam Ishto beget Yashan. A man is allowed to divorce his wife with an old get, which we will define in a moment. Beit Hillel Osrin, but Beit Hillel says, no, you're not allowed to use it. Now, note that Beit Hillel did not say that it's prohibited, that did not say that it's not a valid get. He just prohibits using it. So that's an important fact that we'll see is relevant in a moment. Be'ezu who get yashan, what is considered an old get? Kol shenisi ima me'achar shekasavo la. Anything that where the couple is alone together after the get was written. That if in fact they're alone together, we're going to be worried. So b'mai kamiflaki, what are we arguing about? And the Mishnah is now going to explain what we're worried about. So Beit Shammai Savrei, Beit Shammai thinks the following: Lo amrin gzeira shema yomru gittin kodem livna. We're not worried about a case of of people saying that the get came before any child. Well, what does that mean? Well, let's take a look at Rashi. So it's Rashi 3, 6, 9, 12, 15 lines down in the narrow lines. Gitu kodem livna, shema yishaheh et haget shnatayim b'shalosh ben ksiva l'nesina. Maybe he'll wait 2 or 3 years between the writing and the giving. Ve'yula bamnim mimenu. And it turns out that there are children that have been born as a result of their relationship. B'toch hasman, in the meantime. And then after he's had an additional child, they'll get divorced. He'll use this old get and they'll get divorced. And after some days, when everybody forgets exactly when the get was given, Yeruzmana get, they'll see the date on the get is from before the child was born. Kodem l'leidas haben, the Yehusuvurin shenitan la mishas ksiva. And people will think that the get was given at the time it was written. The Yomru, and they'll say mina penuya nolad, that she was not married when she had this child. Mishigarsha, and it was when she was divorced. Vahavi pagam, and if in fact the relationship was one of a Kohen and his wife, then this child will have a blemish and he'll be a chol and he won't be allowed to have truma, and he won't be considered a Kohen. And so that's a real problem that will be have this suspicion. And so as a result, but Beit Shammai says we're not worried about that. But according to Beit Hillel, we are worried about it. Now, we said again earlier that it was Hillel who says that it's forbidden, not that it's not valid, not that it's not kosher. So Rabbi Abba, Shmuel. So Rabbi Abba says in the name of Shmuel, Im nisis lo teitze. However, if the woman used that old get and got divorced, and got married again, we're not going to make her leave her husband, because again, it's still a valid get. It's just not ideal. And we're worried about what might be said. The Ikadamri, and some go even further. Rabbi Abba, Shmuel, Im Nisgarsha Tinase Lechatchila, that if in fact they got divorced, then and they used it, then in fact she is even allowed to remarry. Now Rashi qualifies this and says beget yashan, again Im Nisgarsha just before the Mishnah, beget yashan v'halach bala lemedinas hayam. That if in fact the situation is where it would be very difficult for her to get a new get, but if there's not going to be a problem with her getting a new get, well then of course she should get a new get, and that way resolve the issue with the old get. So that brings us to the next Mishnah, and we'll pick up, God willing, from there tomorrow. Keep an eye out on your WhatsApp, because I may just record this session as opposed to doing it live, given the problems that we had today with my internet. So it may make more sense for me to just do it live then. So please keep an eye out for that, and I will look forward to learning with you tomorrow. Because the next Mishnah is interesting. It deals with a whole series of cases that the old get, a whole series of other potential defects and the problems that those defects can cause for a woman if in fact she thinks that the defected get is in fact valid. So it highlights the responsibility to watch out to make sure that gets don't get confused. So have a fabulous day and look forward to continuing our learning tomorrow.